Joining us now, Alan Orr, an immigration attorney and past president of the American Immigration Lawyers Association. Alan, thank you for being with us this morning. I've been, thinking about what are your thoughts and what are your main concerns going forward with this new reality?
So first, Stephen Miller's deputy, he's not chief of staff, and that's just a message to his power and where the Trump administration sort of finds him beside someone who was a Kemp Republican. So Kemp was quite a different type of Republican. With regards to Tom Homan, he's a 30-year career police officer. So he's going to follow the rules. He's not exactly the nicest person, but he is a rule follower and not a rule breaker. And he had these same sort of resources when he worked under the Obama administration, and he was not successful in closing the border or stopping, or mass deporting a lot of people. What he did do was do a minor raid, some raids of some factories in Mississippi. He caught 620 undocumented individuals at low-wage jobs, which disrupted the whole area of just sort of farm workers. So the concept that the president by election is going to change the will of government is just a falsehood. He doesn't have the staff. He doesn't have the planes. They don't have the pilots. They don't have the resources. There's a 3 million case backlog right now in immigration court and 650 judges. And our Supreme Court has recently said in 2020 that each undocumented immigrant receives due process. So the concept of doing this mass deportation is just sort of off base.
The thing is, and I'm glad you mentioned this because you give us context as you always do, but under the Obama administration, there were years where more than 400,000 plus people were deported. And at the time, the president was very clear that he was prioritizing what those deportations who the people deported would be. There was, there was the criminals, all that. But in reality, a lot of people that were not criminals were also deported. And I'm just wondering, what is it that the executive has as far as how much power does the executive have to deal with issues like deportation and immigration policy and asylum policy?
So let's make a distinction between the Obama administration, because a lot of those deportations happened at the port of entry at the southern border. So that's a larger number and different than doing these big interior enforcement actions with a variety of states with different laws and different rules. So that's distinguishable from this case. And the president does not have the right to go in there. So what we're talking to our clients right now is about, it's great to be in the Americans where we have these sort of rules, because most time when ICE shows up, they have an administrative warrant. In order to enter your home, they need a judicial warrant if you're an individual, and the same thing to go into private places within a company. So if they show up, you don't just sort of turn over the keys and say, do whatever you like. There's still the process of finding these individuals indistinguishably. So the process that they're doing right now is this mass fear of having a large group of people sort of feel in fear of being in the United States. And this is what I'm telling everybody. This is the new talk for immigrants in this country. Black people for a long time have had to talk with their young kids about if a cop stops you. Now every immigrant is going to have the talk, whether you're documented or undocumented, because there's nothing distinguishable about that without your paperwork. So have your paperwork in order. If you are able to get a passport, have a passport. If you have documents about your legal status, carry them with you at all times, or make sure you have copies of those. Have a plan if you're undocumented, that if you are captured or detained, that your family will know what to do next. They have an attorney that they can contact and some resources to help you get through the system to make sure you get the due process as needed. You do not have to say anything if you're detained, and never sign anything without consulting a lawyer.
Alan, NBC News is exclusive reporting that Trump is considering ending 2 Biden immigration programs, the CBP One app and the parole program for people from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela who have a U.S. sponsor. That's more than 1.3 million people have benefited from these. What can President Trump do with these programs, and what happens to those 1.3 plus million people?
Right. So if the concept is to remove undocumented people, he's just building a greater class and a greater dispersity. He might know where they are, but still, these are people who are friends, who are working in companies, who have jobs, people who rebuilt Springfield, Ohio, to sort of supplement those jobs and bring those economies back, that he hopes to remove them. I hope people remember, for those who do watch the Marvel game, the Endgame, when half the people sort of disappeared, and what that happened with emotionally to people, but also to jobs and economy. This concept of rounding up immigrants and removing them is not going to help us, when in fact it was the immigrant influx under the Biden administration that helped us get through COVID. So the concept doesn't seem unworkable, and making more people undocumented will only increase the amount of money it would take to remove them. Think about Texas. Texas has spent $4.4 billion to remove a total of somewhere around 23,000 people from Texas. Otherwise, they were busing or building walls.
And Alan, you and I have spoken about this over the years, but it's just the concept of asylum, right? And it's how it has changed and how administrations are able to change even the basic concept of what it is to ask for asylum in our country. How do we, Alan, reinforce that concept, and how do we define it best for those that are looking towards the United States as a beacon of hope, as a light of the American dream?
Unfortunately, asylum has been so poisoned right now because asylum is a legal way to enter the country. So anyone seeking asylum is here lawfully under our Constitution. And until Congress removes asylum, asylum is still a legal way to enter the country. Unfortunately, because of the troubles around the world, we have so many people seeking asylum that we've decided to redefine it as this taking rather than the giving that is presented to the United States. I mean, even I believe Elon Musk came as a refugee, or maybe at some point someone in his family. A lot of company starters did. But I think it's a misunderstanding of how asylum operates. And maybe we might need to redefine the way the process works, as Biden has sought to do. And we are looking that it might be too aggressive. But the concept that people need help and an understanding of welcoming the other as we move into the Christmas season, when we think about in Christian religion, one of the greatest refugees of all time, we need to rethink the way we are going to be Americans, because sort of keeping out the other will not produce what we want.